Long before words were written, there were stories carried by the wind, tales whispered around fires, passed from one generation to the next. Among them, one name rose above all others: Zeus. He was the lord of Olympus, the ruler of gods, the bringer of thunder and rain. But behind the crack of lightning lies a deeper truth. Beyond marble statues and temple hymns, few dared to imagine it. Zeus was not only immortal, he was deathless. His story is not just about power or Olympus. It is about balance, destiny, and the thread between gods and mortals. When storms gathered over seas and mountains, people felt more than fear. They felt presence. They felt Zeus. Tonight, we step into this timeless myth, not to see battles, but echoes of wisdom and mystery, to find how Zeus became more than a god of thunder, and to learn why his story did not end. Perhaps it was never meant to. Thunder is often the language of the heavens, a low rumble in the distance, a flash of light that cuts the sky in two. For mortals, it is a warning. But for those who listen closely, thunder is not only a storm, it is a whisper of something greater, something endless. And that whisper has always carried a name: Zeus. When we speak of gods, we speak of immortality, the idea that their lives stretch beyond the reach of human time. But with Zeus, there is something different, something deeper, something that lingers, even when myths fade and temples fall. Zeus is not merely immortal, he is deathless. To understand what that means, we must travel back, not in days or years, but in the rhythm of eternity. A time before calendars, before kingdoms, before even the first prayer was spoken by mortal lips. In that ancient silence, existence itself was raw. Sky above, earth below, and from this union powers emerged. Some were vast and unshaped, like the sea's endless tide, others fierce and consuming, like fire unbound. Among them, a destiny was forming, a presence that would one day be called Zeus. But here is the secret. Before he was crowned king of Olympus, before his name was carved in stone, Zeus was already written into the fabric of the cosmos. Not as a ruler, not as a warrior, but as balance itself. Mortals would later call him father of gods and men. Yet the essence of Zeus was not born from title or crown. It was born from necessity, a need for harmony in a world that could so easily slip into chaos. The storm was not his weapon. The storm was his voice. And through that voice, the world learned rhythm. The gentle cycle of calm and thunder, of light and shadow, of order and wildness. So, what does it mean to be deathless? It means no thread of fate can cut the soul. It means no silence can swallow the voice. Even as empires fall, even as languages change, Zeus remains. Not because he clings to life, but because life clings to him. Consider this. Every time a storm gathers, the memory of Zeus stirs. Every time a spark lights the dark, his presence awakens. The whispers of eternity remind us that Zeus is not gone, because he was never bound by the limits of time. Imagine an ancient traveler standing on a high cliff. The sea crashes below, the clouds churn above. Fear trembles in the traveler's chest. And yet within that fear, there is awe. For in that storm, he senses something more. Not just danger, not just rain, but a présence éternelle. That is Zeus. The whisper of eternity is not loud. It is not thunder that shatters mountains, but thunder that rolls quietly, endlessly, reminding us of something greater, a reminder that some stories cannot die. Zeus's deathlessness is not about defiance. It is not about resisting the end. It is about being woven so deeply into existence that end and beginning no longer matter. Like the cycle of seasons, like the rising and setting of the Sunday, like the endless tide. That is why Zeus does not fade. Even when temples crumble, even when myths are buried beneath centuries, the whisper remains. It lingers in thunder. It sparkles in lightning. It waits in silence, ready to return. And so we begin. The story of the deathless Zeus is not about conquest. It is not about war. It is about a presence timeless, unbroken, inevitable. It is about how the whisper of eternity became the voice of the sky, and how the voice of the sky became the heartbeat of myth. Zeus is deathless, not because he cannot die, but because he has always been and always will be. Every great story begins not with crowns, nor with thunder, but with birth. And for Zeus, birth itself was a tale of danger and destiny. He was the child of sky and earth, born to Cronus, lord of time, and Rhea, the gentle goddess of nurture. But the cradle of Zeus was not soft. It was shadowed by fear. Cronus, his father, ruled the world with a heart heavy with dread. For he knew a prophecy that one of his children would rise against him. And so, Cronus chose a path of silence, a path of swallowing each child, one by one, before they could take their first steps. Imagine, then, the grief of Rhea each time a new child came into the light. The joy of creation was stolen. Each cry of a newborn became a farewell. The halls of earth grew quieter, emptied of the laughter of gods unborn. But destiny has its way of whispering louder than fear. When Rhea carried Zeus, she felt something different. This child was not meant to vanish into silence. This child carried a spark that could not be hidden. So Rhea sought the wisdom of Earth herself, her mother Gaia. Together, they wove a plan. When the time came for Zeus's birth, Rhea did not place him in the hands of Cronus. Instead, she carried him away to a secret cave, hidden deep in the mountains of Crete. There, among the shadows and the echo of dripping stone, Zeus took his first breath, not in a palace, not in the halls of gods, but in the heart of the earth. And what is more fitting for the child of sky and earth than to be cradled by both? The cave became his shelter, its walls, his guardians. The nymphs of the wild cared for him. The goat Amalthea gave her milk to strengthen him. Bees carried honey to sweeten his lips. And the Curetes, warriors of Crete, danced and clashed their shields, their rhythm drowning out the cries of the infant. So Cronus would never hear. From the very beginning, Zeus's life was a song of protection and secrecy, not of armies, but of whispers, not of battles, but of nurture. While Cronus swallowed silence, Rhea and Gaia nurtured a hidden flame. That flame would one day rise high enough to light the whole of Olympus. Even as a child, Zeus was not alone. He was shaped by devotion, by guardians who gave without asking, by nature itself, which wrapped around him like a cloak. Perhaps that is why Zeus grew not only in strength, but in presence. From the earth, he learned endurance. From the sky, he would later learn power. But from love, he learned balance. The story of his infancy tells us something profound, that greatness is not always born in light. Sometimes it grows quietly in the shadows. It waits, watched over by unseen hands. It survives because someone believes. Zeus was more than the child of sky and earth. He was the child of hope, the living answer to fear, the promise that destiny cannot be silenced forever. Cronus believed he had swallowed every chance of defeat. But in that hidden cave, far from his reach, the future was breathing. The future was growing, and the whisper of eternity was becoming louder. Zeus's earliest moments remind us of something timeless. That protection, though unseen, is powerful. That love, though quiet, is unshakable. And that even when the world seems swallowed by fear, hope finds a way to survive. So, we leave this part of the story with an image. A child sleeping in a cave. Thunder silent for now. The world unaware of what is coming. But the earth itself listening. The sky above waiting. And destiny leaning close to whisper. This child will not fade. This child is deathless. The cave in Crete held its secret. Above, Cronus ruled. But within the mountain, a hidden child grew strong. Zeus grew not only in body, but in vision. The boy of shadows became a youth touched by storms. And within him stirred the promise of balance. The whisper of eternity turned into a steady voice. No longer only a child of sky and earth, Zeus was becoming something greater. a leader shaped by nature, nurtured by love. But the throne of the cosmos still belonged to Cronus. Time itself seemed locked in his grip. The world waited, holding its breath. How could the hidden child step into the light? Not with armies, not with swords, but with wisdom, patience, and trust. Zeus grew, and bonds became his strength. The nymphs saw not just a child, they saw presence, a being destined to guide. The earth whispered through Gaia. The sky stirred with every flash of lightning. From these whispers, Zeus learned the art of listening. To lead is not only to command, it is to hear, to feel, to answer when called. The time came when he could no longer remain hidden. The cave had served its purpose. The world beyond waited for his step. He did not leave with anger. He left with resolve. The resolve of one who carries not just power, but responsibility. Stories tell of allies he found among his kin. Those swallowed by Cronus were not lost forever. The bond of siblings cannot be broken by fear. Together, they would one day rise. But this story is not about battles. It is about becoming. Zeus's path to the throne was paved with trust and vision. He stepped into the world, and the skies took notice. Clouds moved with his breath. Winds shifted with his presence. And when thunder rolled, it did not sound of war. It sounded of arrival. Mortals looked to the skies. They felt awe, but also comfort. Storms once feared now carried strange order. The balance of nature felt closer, more complete. Zeus's rise was not sudden. It was steady, like dawn across the horizon. It was quiet, like roots beneath the soil. Yet it was unstoppable. Cronus may have held the throne, but time was shifting. And, in that shift, a new order waited. Zeus's essence was beyond challenge. Not from strength alone, but because he embodied harmony, justice, renewal. When he stood on Olympus, it was not as a conqueror. It was as one fulfilling what had always been written. The child of shadows became the voice of the sky. Zeus rose not by defiance, but by destiny. Not by seizing power, but by becoming power itself. And so his reign began. A reign not only of lightning, but of balance. Not only of storms, but of order. His rise reminds us of something timeless. That true leadership is not fear. It is not silence. It is listening, nurturing, guiding. His throne was not domination. It was balance, woven of sky, earth, eternity. And in that balance, the world found rhythm. The storm became not a curse, but a reminder that the deathless Zeus had become the heartbeat of the heavens. Every great story moves forward not only with choice, but with unseen threads guiding each step. For the gods, those threads belong to the Moirai, the Fates, three timeless weavers, shaping destiny with steady hands. Clotho spun the thread of life. Lachesis measured it. Atropos, with silent certainty, decided where it must end. Even the gods were not beyond their loom, for in the tapestry of existence, no one was fully free. Zeus knew this truth well. He was born from prophecy, protected by whispers, raised in secret, lifted by destiny's call. Yet the path ahead was still woven, not written. Each choice, each bond, became part of the design. The fates did not chain him. They guided him. And in that balance between freedom and inevitability, his heart was shaped. When Zeus stepped upon Olympus, he did not claim the mountain by force. He was received by it, as if the stones themselves had waited. The halls of cloud and marble seemed to rise with him. Every column whispered of permanence. Every gust of wind carried a memory of what was to come. Here, high above the earth, Zeus felt the weight of eternity. To rule was not only to hold power, it was to walk with fate at your side, knowing each decision echoed far beyond your lifetime. The Moirai appeared in stories of that age, sometimes as distant shadows, sometimes as voices woven into dreams. They reminded all gods and mortals alike. Every life was a thread in a greater pattern. Zeus often stood in silence, gazing at the endless sky. The stars above were not random. They were patterns, reminders stories written in light, each constellation a mark upon the loom of fate, a record of what had been, a whisper of what might yet be. Within this eternal weaving, Zeus discovered something profound. Destiny shaped the path, but choice gave it meaning. A river may be guided by earth, but the water still decides how it will flow. So Zeus began to lead with awareness. Not every storm was unleashed in anger. Not every bolt of lightning was meant to strike. Sometimes thunder rolled simply to remind the world of balance. His siblings stood with him, freed from the shadow of Cronus. Each carried their own thread. Together, they formed the Council of Olympus, a chorus of voices, united yet distinct. Hera, with quiet authority. Poseidon, with the rhythm of the sea. Hestia, with the warmth of the hearth. Demeter, with the breath of harvest. And Hades, guardian of the unseen realms below. Their threads were woven beside his, not beneath him. Olympus was not built on one thread, but on a tapestry of many. Zeus understood this. He did not seek to silence the Moirai, nor to undo their weaving. Instead, he learned to listen to their rhythm, to guide his reign in harmony with their design. In this balance between fate and choice, Zeus found his power, not in the lightning in his hand, not in the thunder in his voice, but in knowing that even eternity respects the loom of destiny. The deathless Zeus began not only as a ruler, but as a keeper of order, a guardian of balance between freedom and fate. For what is eternity, if not weaving countless lives? What is leadership, if not carrying those threads with care? In the heart of Olympus, among clouds touching stars, he stood, not only as king, but as part of the tapestry itself, a thread woven by destiny, a thread that would never break. The deathless Zeus had found his place in the loom of fate, and the pattern of eternity was forever changed. When Zeus rose to Olympus, he carried more than a crown. He carried the weight of sky and storm, the breath of thunder, the silence of stars. The world had seen rulers before, but none whose voice could move the heavens themselves. Zeus's power was not in shouting commands. It was in the resonance of his presence. When he spoke, the air seemed to listen. When he was silent, the wind carried his meaning. When his laughter rolled across peaks, it was thunder made gentle. Mortals looked upward, not always in fear, but often in wonder, for the rumble of the sky was no longer chaos. It was communication. A farmer tilling his fields heard thunder as rain to nourish the earth. A sailor on the sea saw lightning as guidance across waves. A child staring at clouds felt awe, but also protection. Zeus was not distant. Though high upon Olympus, his voice reached valleys, shores, and hidden places where mortals prayed. And he listened. This was the gift of the sky. It was vast, but not unreachable. It was high, but always above every life. It watched, it covered, it heard. Zeus learned to weave his power with compassion. Storms could destroy, but they could also renew. Thunder could frighten, but it could also remind. Lightning could strike, but it could also illuminate. Each act of the sky carried meaning, and Zeus became its interpreter. Not a tyrant of storms, but their voice. Among the gods, this gave him authority. Among mortals, it gave him reverence. For what ruler does not long to be both mighty and heard? Stories tell of his words, moving stubborn hearts. A quarrel between siblings softened when Zeus spoke. A river goddess found peace when his voice echoed like calm rain. Even the mountains seemed to bow when he called. Yet the voice of Zeus was not only for others, it was for himself. In speaking, he discovered who he was. Each storm was a mirror, each whisper of wind a reminder, each flash of lightning a spark of recognition. The voice of the sky taught him patience. Storms did not come instantly. They gathered, formed slowly, then released with power. So too did wisdom. It grew with time, and when spoken, it changed the world. This is why the voice of Zeus was called deathless, not because his words never faded, but because their meaning endured. A storm ends, but its memory shapes the earth it touched. A word of truth may vanish in sound, but it lives forever in hearts. Zeus's reign was marked by balance, the balance of speaking and listening, of commanding and nurturing, of reminding the world that even thunder has gentleness. Temples rose in his honor. Priests lifted their voices not to imitate, but to call upon him, for the sky was never silent. It was alive with his presence. Mortals prayed, and their prayers were not always answered with miracles. They were answered with rain, with wind, with a clearing sky after storms. These were not accidents. They were reminders that the voice of the sky was woven into life. Zeus became more than a god of storms. He became a companion to humanity, a reminder that divinity is not only might, but presence. The deathless Zeus reigned not from stone, but from the endless sky. His voice carried across mountains, seas, and forests. It carried across centuries. It still carries now, in every storm, in every whisper of the wind. The voice of Zeus is the voice of eternity, not demanding, but reminding, not fleeting, but forever. And in that voice, the world found guidance. It found balance. It found the heartbeat of the sky. Olympus was not only a throne for Zeus, it was a gathering place, a home of voices, laughter, and stories woven into eternity. When the gods stood together for the first time, the mountain itself seemed to breathe. Clouds shifted gently, as though making space for something greater than stone. The siblings of Zeus were not merely companions. They were threads in the same tapestry, woven tightly by destiny and choice. Hera stood at his side, a presence both steady and fierce. Her eyes carried the depth of guardianship, reminding all that power must be balanced by care. She was not only consort, but counterpart. Poseidon's laughter rolled like waves against the cliffs. His spirit was restless, his power undeniable. He brought the sea's rhythm to Olympus, reminding all that freedom was as sacred as order. Hestia, with quiet steps, tended the hearth of the gods. She did not shout, nor did she demand. But in her warmth, Olympus found its center. Her flame reminded every god that home is more than walls. It is presence. Demeter came with the breath of harvest. Where she walked, meadows seemed greener, fields richer. She carried the promise of nourishment, not for the gods, but for mortals with empty hands. And Hades, silent yet resolute, carried the weight of what lay beneath. He did not boast of his realm, for shadow needs no praise. Yet his presence was steady, a reminder that endings belong to the order of life. Together, these six stood as more than survivors of Cronus. They were the architects of a new age. Their bonds were not always easy, for each carried a nature vast and unyielding. Storm and sea, fire and harvest, life and shadow, these were not simple forces. They were eternal, but in Olympus, they learned to weave them into harmony. And harmony, they discovered, was not silence. It was the blending of many voices into one song. Zeus often looked upon his siblings with quiet reflection. Without them, Olympus would be an empty throne. With them, it was a living realm. Mortals felt this unity as well. When the sea was calm, they thanked Poseidon. When the hearth glowed with warmth, they whispered to Hestia. When crops grew heavy, they honored Demeter. And in every ending, they accepted Hades' quiet presence. Yet in all these prayers, there was one thread that tied them together. Zeus, as keeper of balance, stood not above, but among. He listened, he learned, he led. The bonds of Olympus were not only family, they were covenant, a promise that the gods would not rule apart, but together. The halls of Olympus became a council. Arguments rose, as storms must. But so too did laughter, as waves break into foam. And in every decision, they remembered the world below, the mortals who depended on their unseen harmony. In this way, Olympus was both distant and close. It touched the stars, yet reached into every home. The gods were eternal, yet their bonds were woven into mortal lives. For what is a hearth without fire? What is the sea without wind? What is the harvest without rain? What is life without its end? The bonds of Olympus reminded all that no force stands alone. Each is part of a greater whole. Zeus carried this truth in his reign. Though he bore the lightning, he never forgot the warmth of Hestia, the care of Demeter, the vastness of Poseidon, the stillness of Hades, the strength of Hera. This was the secret of Olympus. Not power alone, but power shared. Not voices silenced, but voices joined. And so the mountain stood, not as a fortress, but as a home. The deathless Zeus did not rule in isolation. He ruled in communion, with siblings, with gods, with the very fabric of existence. And in their unity, Olympus became eternal. The gods of Olympus were eternal. Their thrones stood high above the clouds. Their voices echoed across mountains and seas. But even in their greatness, the gods turned their gaze downward. For below Olympus lay the fragile world of mortals. They were brief lives, sparks that flared and faded. Yet in that brevity, there was something eternal. Mortals did not command storms or summon fire. They did not weave the fabric of destiny. And yet they carried gifts that even gods could not ignore. Zeus watched them with quiet wonder. In their weakness, they found courage. In their limits, they found meaning. And in their fleeting days, they cherished what eternity sometimes forgot. A farmer rising before dawn, tilling dry soil with tired hands. A mother whispering lullabies by firelight. A traveler looking to the stars, searching for guidance in the unknown. These were not mighty deeds, but they were profound. Zeus saw that mortals carried the gift of striving. Though their lives were short, they lived as if each moment mattered. And this, he realized, was its own kind of immortality. The gods debated among themselves. Some laughed at the fragility of mortals. Others pitied them. But Zeus did not laugh, and he did not pity. He respected, for he knew that eternity without purpose was emptiness, and mortals, in their briefness, carried purpose in every breath. The gift of mortals was not power. It was meaning. It was love spoken in parting, songs sung at harvest, tears shed for what would never return. These were things the gods could witness, but never fully know, for they were not bound by time. And so Zeus listened to their prayers, with more than duty. He listened with gratitude, for every whispered hope carried a reminder of what mattered. When a soldier prayed for peace before battle, Zeus felt courage. When a child prayed for rain upon the fields, he felt trust. When lovers prayed for a life together, he felt the sweetness of time. The heavens answered not always with miracles, but sometimes with silence, sometimes with storms, sometimes with blessings in ordinary days. For even the gods could not erase sorrow, nor could they grant endless joy, but they could remind mortals that they were seen. And in being seen, life found its dignity. Zeus spoke often to the council of gods about this gift. He told them Olympus must not only rule, but also honor. For without mortals, the gods were voices in an empty sky. The temples built upon the earth were not only stone and altar, they were bridges of trust, of fear, of devotion. Zeus walked those temples in spirit, listening to chants, watching smoke rise toward the heavens. Every offering, whether humble grain or golden crown, bound gods and mortals together. This bond gave Zeus strength, for in honoring mortals, he remembered what eternity could forget, that each choice, each word, each act was not infinite, but precious. And so the deathless Zeus became not only ruler of storms, but guardian of this bond. He protected it, nurtured it, and carried it like lightning in his hand. The gift of mortals was not theirs alone. It was a gift shared with the divine, a reminder that eternity and brevity were not opposites, but companions. For what is forever, if not measured by the fleeting? And what is fleeting, if not remembered by the eternal? In this truth, Zeus found his reign deepened, not only the king of gods, but the keeper of meaning, not only the voice of the sky, but the listener of hearts. And so the bond endured, through storms and silence, through temples and prayers, through life and its end. The gods were eternal, mortals were brief, but together they carried a story that would never fade. This was the gift of mortals, and this too was the gift to Zeus. Immortality sounds like a gift, a crown placed upon the head of gods, and yet even eternity carries its own trials. Zeus, the deathless one, knew this truth more than any other. For though his reign was unshaken and his throne untouchable, immortality did not mean freedom. The stars wheeled overhead in endless patterns. Seasons turned like a great wheel forever. Mortals lived, loved, and passed. But Olympus remained the same. And in that sameness, Zeus felt the weight of forever. He watched generations of mortals rise and fall like waves upon the shore. Each life unique, each heart carrying its own story, and yet all vanished, leaving only memory. To a god, memory is both a treasure and a burden. For Zeus remembered all. Every prayer whispered at night, every vow shouted into the storm, every tear shed upon the earth. And though he held eternity, he was not untouched by longing. Not longing for death, but longing for the beauty of what could end. For what ends is cherished, and what is eternal risks being forgotten. This was the first trial of immortality, to carry endless memory without being consumed by it. The second trial came in the stillness. Mortals lived with urgency, for their time was short. But Zeus had no clock counting his days, no end to shape his purpose. When time stretches without limit, even the greatest throne may feel like a prison. And so, Zeus sought ways to keep his spirit alive. He found meaning in the storms, in the laughter of mortals, in the bonds with gods who shared his fate. Yet still, the silence of eternity pressed upon him. For when the world grew quiet, Zeus could hear the echo of forever, and it was heavy. The third trial was choice. For a god, choice carried weight beyond measure. One decision could alter the lives of thousands, could bend the course of history itself. Mortals made choices knowing their reach was limited, but Zeus could not escape the enormity of his power. Every storm he sent, every blessing he gave, echoed far into the future. And so, immortality was not simply living without end. It was carrying responsibility without rest. Zeus bore this trial with dignity, but he was not without weariness. For even a god longs, sometimes, for release. Yet in these trials, there was also strength. For in carrying memory, Zeus became the keeper of stories. In enduring stillness, he learned to find wonder in small things. The spark of firelight, the cry of an eagle in the dawn. And in carrying the weight of choice, he grew wise. He learned that power was not in thunder alone, but in restraint, in mercy, in listening. The trials of immortality shaped Zeus as much as storms and battles ever did. They were the hidden tests, the silent burdens carried by gods. And though he was deathless, Zeus understood the value of what was fleeting. It was the fragile lives of mortals that reminded him of the beauty of endings. This paradox immortal yet longing for the mortal made him more than a king of storms. It made him a god who listened, a god who cared, a god who remembered. So when thunder rolls across the sky and lightning flashes through the clouds, remember this: it is not only power you hear, it is also the voice of eternity, bearing the trials of endless life and the wisdom found within them. For even the deathless Zeus, in all his majesty, carries trials upon his immortal heart. And perhaps that is what makes him not just a god of Olympus, but a reflection of every soul, mortal or divine, seeking meaning in the endless sky. Immortality sounds like a gift, a crown placed upon the head of gods. And yet, even eternity carries its own trials. Zeus, the deathless one, knew this truth more than any other. For though his reign was unshaken and his throne untouchable, immortality did not mean freedom. The stars wheeled overhead in endless patterns. Seasons turned like a great wheel forever. Mortals lived, loved, and passed, but Olympus remained the same. And in that sameness, Zeus felt the weight of forever. He watched generations of mortals rise and fall like waves upon the shore, each life unique, each heart carrying its own story, and yet all vanished, leaving only memory. To a god, memory is both a treasure and a burden. For Zeus remembered all, every prayer whispered at night, every vow shouted into the storm, every tear shed upon the earth. And though he held eternity, he was not untouched by longing. Not longing for death, but longing for the beauty of what could end. For what ends is cherished, And what is eternal risks being forgotten? This was the first trial of immortality, to carry endless memory without being consumed by it. The second trial came in the stillness. Mortals lived with urgency, for their time was short. But Zeus had no clock counting his days, no end to shape his purpose. When time stretches without limit, even the greatest throne may feel like a prison. And so Zeus sought ways to keep his spirit alive. He found meaning in the storms, in the laughter of mortals, in the bonds with gods who shared his fate. Yet still, the silence of eternity pressed upon him. For when the world grew quiet, Zeus could hear the echo of forever. And it was heavy. The third trial was choice. For a god, choice carried weight beyond measure. One decision could alter the lives of thousands, could bend the course of history itself. Mortals made choices, knowing their reach was limited. But Zeus could not escape the enormity of his power. Every storm he sent, every blessing he gave, echoed far into the future. And so, immortality was not simply living without end. It was carrying responsibility without rest. Zeus bore this trial with dignity, but he was not without weariness. For even a god longs, sometimes, for release. Yet in these trials, there was also strength. For in carrying memory, Zeus became the keeper of stories. In enduring stillness, he learned to find wonder in small things. The spark of firelight, the cry of an eagle in the dawn. And in carrying the weight of choice, he grew wise. He learned that power was not in thunder alone, but in restraint, in mercy, in listening. The trials of immortality shaped Zeus as much as storms and battles ever did. They were the hidden tests, the silent burdens carried by gods. And though he was deathless, Zeus understood the value of what was fleeting. It was the fragile lives of mortals that reminded him of the beauty of endings. This paradox, immortal yet longing for the mortal, made him more than a king of storms. It made him a god who listened, a god who cared, a god who remembered. So when thunder rolls across the sky and lightning flashes through the clouds, remember this: it is not only power you hear, it is also the voice of eternity, bearing the trials of endless life and the wisdom found within them. For even the deathless Zeus, in all his majesty, carries trials upon his immortal heart. And perhaps that is what makes him not just a god of Olympus, but a reflection of every soul, mortal or divine, seeking meaning in the endless sky. The crown of Olympus was not made of gold. It was forged of thunder, sky, and unyielding authority. Only Zeus, the deathless one, could bear it. But every crown, no matter how bright, carries weight. To sit upon the highest throne is to hold every gaze, to bear every prayer, and to answer with justice. Mortals prayed for rain, for harvest, for victories, for mercy. The gods quarreled, demanding his judgment and his command. Zeus stood between them all, mediator and guardian. The crown bound him not only to power, but to duty. At first, he wore it with triumph, proof of his rise. But as centuries passed, the crown grew heavier. For power is never still. It pulls and demands. Every lightning bolt was not only force, but symbol. Each act shaped the trust of mortals and gods alike. The burden was not in storms or wars, but in choices. Every choice of a ruler echoes across eternity. Hera questioned. Poseidon demanded. Athena sought wisdom. Zeus had to balance them all, to hold unity. The weight of the crown was also silence. Who counsels the king of gods? Who questions thunder? Even among immortals, Zeus often stood alone. In solitude, he faced the trial of leadership. To hold power, but not be consumed by it. To command storms, yet still listen to whispers. The crown reminded him that rule meant stewardship. The skies were vast, the earth fragile, mortals dependent. True kingship was not in triumph, but in patience. Not in thunder's roar, but in steady strength. The crown taught Zeus humility through mistakes. Each error echoed, each lesson carved into his reign. Reverence was fragile, renewed not by fear, but justice. The crown became a trust, not merely dominion. Eternity without wisdom would be emptiness. A ruler's greatest strength was balance, not thunder. As ages turned, Zeus carried the crown with dignity. The storms obeyed him, and so did the skies. The gods challenged him, but they also followed. Mortals prayed to him, but feared to disappoint. To wear the crown was to be both near and distant, both eternal and present, ruler and servant. The weight never lessened, yet Zeus did not falter. In it, he found not only power but purpose, not only eternity, but the meaning of his reign. So when thunder shakes the heavens, remember this. It is not only the might of Zeus you hear. It is the voice of a crown carried through eternity, the weight of leadership borne without rest, and the steady hand of the deathless king. In Olympus, silence was rare. Laughter, debate, and immortal clamor filled the air. Yet there was a hush that all respected the hush of fate. The Moirai spun their threads far from mortal eyes. Clotho spun, Lachesis measured, Atropos cut. Even Zeus could not wholly unmake their design. He ruled Olympus with thunder and authority. Yet destiny whispered at the edges of his reign. Not chains, but shadows. Not commands, but reminders. The whisper came in quiet moments, in the crackle before a storm, in the stillness of night. It reminded him that even eternity bends to something greater. Zeus often wondered about the reach of his power. He could split mountains and silence quarrels of gods. But could he defy the Moirai's threads? Could he truly unweave what was woven? Immortality was not absolute freedom. It was a dance with destiny's loom. Sometimes he led, sometimes he yielded. Even a king must bow to time's weaving. The whisper of fate was steady, patient, eternal. It reminded Zeus his choices mattered, yet they lived within a larger tapestry. Each decision was a bright thread, but only one. At times, he longed to tear aside the veil, to see how far his reign would stretch, to know what endings might come. But the Moirai gave no answers. And so Zeus learned patience, not certainty, but wisdom. Power was not in knowing all. It was in choosing well within the unknown. Fate whispered to him also of mortals. Their threads were short, fragile, burning bright. They lived with urgency, days sharp with meaning. Perhaps that was why he envied them. Mortals had the gift of ending, the grace of closure. Zeus had eternity, yet longed for guidance. The gods too brushed against the loom, Hera with cunning, Athena with wisdom, Apollo with visions, but none could grasp its totality. It humbled Zeus despite his crown and storms. He knew something greater than himself remained. The whisper did not weaken him. It gave him depth. It reminded him eternity was time, not purpose. To choose mercy as often as thunder, to listen as often as he commanded. For though he could not unmake destiny, he could shape the journey toward it. And in that shaping lay his true power. So when thunder rumbles and lightning splits the dark, know it is not only Zeus you hear. It is the echo of destiny, woven through eternity. The Moirai spin, measure, and cut. And Zeus, in all his majesty, listens. In Olympus, there burned a flame that never dimmed. It was no ordinary fire, but the eternal flame. To mortals, fire was warmth and survival. To the gods, this flame was memory and spirit. And it was Zeus who guarded it most fiercely. The flame did not belong to one god or temple. It belonged to all, tying Olympus to the earth. Zeus often gazed into its glow. In its flicker, he saw echoes of time, the laughter of children, the prayers of mortals. The flame remembered everything. It held stories of triumph, loss, and quiet beauty. As long as it burned, nothing was forgotten. The flame was older than Zeus's throne. It had been lit when the world was young. Zeus, mighty though he was only its guardian. The flame taught him power was also preservation. To protect was as noble as to command. When gods quarreled and Olympus shook, the flame endured, a silent witness. Zeus found comfort in its constancy. Even eternity had light that never wavered. Mortals believed their fires mirrored the flame. Each hearth and torch reflected Olympus's blaze. And perhaps it was true. Zeus walked among mortals in disguise. He saw them gather around fires, telling stories. The flame bound them together as it bound gods. He realized the flame lived in courage and kindness. It lived where hope refused to fade. This was the gift he cherished most. Not storms, not the throne, not immortality, but the flame that reminded him of connection. In quiet hours, he honored the flame. It needed no fuel and feared no wind. He simply revered it, as he revered life. The flame was a promise. As long as it burned, stories endured, bonds remained, and hope never vanished. Through every trial, the flame reminded Zeus why he ruled. Not for dominion, but for stewardship. Not for power, but for connection. And so, the flame endured beyond storms and ages. Even now, when thunder shakes the sky, look closer. Behind the storm, there is always light. The eternal flame, steady and bright. In its glow beats the heart of Olympus, and the whisper of the deathless Zeus, guardian of the flame, keeper of memory, witness to eternity.